I'm Chuck Richards, and I am a docent at the Air Museum in McMinnville, Oregon. And I'm here today to tell you about my experience with aircraft and with a particular accident that I witnessed. The reason I work at this museum is because my uncle, who was a B-17 pilot during World War II with the 8th Air Force in England. I was always so proud of him and loved airplanes and everything that had to do with them that's where I began. When it came time in the late 60s, I had an opportunity to join the United States Navy. I went to the Far East, to Vietnam, and at that point I was working with, we were running plane guard for a couple of the carriers, the Constellation and the Ranger. And I got to watch aircraft every day and got to talk to people on aircraft that were flying over our ship. And that just made it even more my thing to do. So after I got back, I began to have a new passion, and that was World War II aircraft. And the best place to see them in the world is an event called the Reno Air Races. The air races are held every year in the second week of September, and they bring almost 200,000 people together to watch World War II aircraft race, and a lot of new aircraft as well. So I began to go, and I actually went 14 times to the air races in Reno, and you begin to realize that the big thing about it is that there is a passion for people who love airplanes. In my life, the main thing that has been my real pride and joy has been working with the airplanes and being close to very famous people that actually were there, people like Chuck Yeager and Bob Hoover and all the people who you hear about, and then to get a chance to really meet them and hear them speak was really quite an opportunity. Well, in 2011, at the air races, I went down and I met friends that I had met over the years. My best friend from Bradenton, Florida came up, and we went to the air races every day, and it was a real event for us and something we'd done many times. It felt like an old jacket you put on, and you get there, and aircraft people are some of the friendliest people you'd ever want to get around, but they're also fatalists. They really believe in what they do, and it's a very dangerous sport. Planes that during World War II flew in the 400-mile-an-hour way now are flying close to 500, and some have gotten close to almost the speed of sound on a propeller-driven aircraft, which is very, very unusual. So we were there having a great time, and every day they had the different heats for the different races. There are many types of planes that they race. There are planes like the sport class, which are small planes that go at pretty high speeds, and they're mostly carbon fiber and materials like that. And then the next class up was the T6s, which were the training planes for World War II, and they're a great old plane, and they're a lot of fun to watch, and it moves right up. And the real star of that group was one called the Unlimiteds. The Unlimiteds basically were extremely fast fighters from World War II, mostly Sea Furies or some Yaks, or of course the P51, which became my best friends over the years. And the P51s make a sound with a Rolls-Royce engine that's better than music to me. It was my real passion to listen to these planes and be around them and watch them work, and it was a great experience. Over the years, I had seen a couple or three pretty serious accidents where pilots were actually killed and so forth, and it was very difficult. But I in no way prepared me for what was going to happen in 2011. Each day is a new adventure, and it starts out with a Wednesday, where the Wednesday was the qualifications, and that was the first time you got to see the planes run, and you would sit there and talk about how good or how bad the airplane was running and everything. And it was kind of strange because we actually noticed that one of the planes seemed to be having trouble with what they call dirty air. Dirty air is air from the airplane ahead of you, it makes it rough for you to fly. So we talked about it a little and we noticed it, but it wasn't anything big. It was just the normal pattern that you usually do with stuff like that. And it had been really great because right before I had come down to Reno from Oregon, I had talked to Steve Hinton, who happened to be the reigning champion in the Unlimiteds, and he was talking about the same things. He was talking about the air and how these planes were affected by all this massive amounts of air that we'd be carrying out. So anyway, the week went along, and on the next day they started out with original qualifying, and they'd go through, and each group of airplanes would start like they start in the morning with the what they call sport class small airplanes. Then they go to the T6s, and then they go right up the scale until the end, which the main event is actually the unlimited aircraft. And so each day we watched, and about 4 in the afternoon these airplanes would come and begin to fly, and they'd warm up on the runway. And you haven't lived until you have been around these airplanes, because when they start, I'd rather listen to the sound that a P51 makes with a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine than music that you listen to. So it was really quite a nice experience. And it's a total experience because you can smell the fuel and you can smell the smoke, and it's just really a real uplifting thing, especially if you love airplanes the way I do. So anyway, we went along, and finally got to be Friday, and on Friday was the big race. That's the semifinals. And so we waited and waited, and about 4 in the afternoon it had begun to get real cloudy, and the air was not much wind. It just really just a basic day with a lot of gray clouds, sort of like Oregon. So we were sitting there and waiting for the race to start, and so they cranked up the engines, and each of the planes pulled out into a line, and then they went out. And there's about 4 planes that are always big winners at this race. The one that everybody mostly knows about is one called Rare Bear, which was a great big radial engine, and it was extremely fast and always had beautiful paint jobs, and so you're always waiting for Rare Bear to start. And then there was a wild painted P51 called Voodoo that was purple and yellow and real bright, and it went right down the line. And one of the last of the planes was a plane called the Galloping Ghost, and it was a P51 that had been modified many times. These airplanes, each year when they come back, they make modifications to get more speed out of them, and this one had come out of Florida. It was a beautiful airplane, all silver, real shiny, and they had done a real lot of work on it to make it faster. And one of the things they did was to cut some of the wings off to make less drag. Drag on an airplane is what keeps a plane from going even faster, and so that's what they were working on. The P51s use what they call an inline engine. The engine is all just sort of like your cars, and so what they did, they had it set up with this Merlin engine, and it had been changed many times. And so anyway, it got up there and the race started, and things were going along pretty basically, but as the planes went by, we sit pretty close to the start-finish line, and as the plane went by, you'd actually see the planes would, if one plane was behind one of the other planes, it would get what they call dirty air. And this dirty air is actually it has a lot of wind, I would say, the way to call it, and it would change the way the airplane flew. So you had to be able to put that airplane as in a cleanest spot as it possibly could. Well, when the planes went by, we actually saw that this Galloping Ghost was having a lot of trouble because it was behind the Rare Bear. The Rare Bear was putting out so much air, that big radial engine was putting out so much air that he was bumping around a lot, and when he came by the start-finish line. And things went along fairly, for the first 2 or 3 laps, pretty smoothly, and then all of a sudden, we noticed something drastic had happened. And in air racing circles, when something goes wrong, they call Mayday, and the planes usually go straight up to get out of the line of all the other aircraft. Well, this airplane didn't just go straight up, it zoomed up and it went up extremely high, and all of a sudden it ran out of power, and it does what they call a stall, and the plane stalled and flipped over and began to fall back to earth, and it was falling faster and faster, and I could see this airplane heading directly for the crowd where I was sitting. And it was sort of like Men in Wartime. I felt like that airplane was headed directly for me personally. I thought to myself, well, if I've got to go, at least I'm doing something that I really love. When I looked up and looked at the cockpit, there was no one in the plane. You saw nobody. There was nobody guiding the airplane. It was strange because I could actually feel the heat from the engine as it went by, and I could smell the gasoline fumes. Where we sat was right next to an area that had been black, kind of was asphalt or blacktop, and the heat was radiating up from that, and the airplane, instead of coming directly at us, actually lifted up in the air, and it zipped over our heads. And right in front of us, where we were sitting, there was box seats. There must have been 5 or 6 rows of box seats, and the plane landed directly in the box seats where I was watching. And the whole day I'd been watching the people down there from where I sat, and you got to almost know those people because there was a bunch of people having a party, and they were having a great time and dancing on the tables and really had a great thing going. And all of a sudden, the plane hit doing better than 500 miles an hour, and when it hit, there was a cloud of debris that shattered, and the plane was gone. There was no plane there anymore. But what was really eerie, the only thing that I saw was an engine block, and this engine block on that Merlin is probably almost 6 feet long, and it probably weighs several hundred pounds, and I watched it slide across the asphalt for almost a quarter of a mile all the way down to clear away from where the bleachers were. And it was just surreal, and everybody just stood there and looked, and no one knew what to do. And we tried to make sense of it. Your mind just doesn't allow you to think. Then I began to come to, I guess, and I looked down there and I saw some of the most heroic people I'd ever seen. Where the plane had landed, it had landed right next to where all the EMT trucks were. And there was a gal, I'll never forget, there was a blonde lady there who began to look around, and I had been in Vietnam and I had seen some terrible things, but nothing to the scale of what was going on right in front of me. And this girl saw actual parts of people's bodies laying there, and she grabbed the banners that had been across the box seats, and she covered up the people that were on the ground because it was a pretty horrendous sight. And I think that she had the best presence. I don't understand how anybody could have the presence to do what she did. When I got back home, I was a different person. For a good week, I'm usually pretty gregarious and like people and like to talk, but for that week I didn't say much. And my family, my daughter especially, knew that I was not playing with a full deck, I guess you'd say, because you couldn't get your mind off that fact that you almost had been involved. It actually worked out that I was probably about 150 feet from where the plane had hit, and I could keep seeing that over and over, and I had all kinds of weird nightmares from that too. And so for probably 2 weeks, I didn't say much to anybody. And about the third week, I began to talk to people about it, and I found out actually it was much better to talk to people and go over it and over it and over it to kind of work the thing out in your mind and realize that you had been there and that you were very fortunate, to be back. But then you also thought about all those people who were there for a good time and ended up having this terrible tragedy happen to them. And so this went on for several months. I actually took a long, long time to try to try to work these things out in my mind. And it got to be, I finally was able to deal with it and talk about it, and I began to feel, again, very lucky that had been saved. And you realize that sometimes it just isn't your time. But I still thought about all those people and the carnage that I'd seen. So anyway, that went on for quite a while. But then about 6 to 8 months later, it became almost the time that I had to make my reservations, and then I had to decide whether or not I wanted to go back to Reno to see the air races, whether I could deal with it. And I really thought seriously for some time about not doing it. I thought that, nah, I can't do this. And it so happened that my wife was going to go with me this next time around, and I said, did I want to make her, put her at risk too? But then I got to thinking about, if you're a real person and you put things, you realize that life doesn't come with any guarantees, and you have to deal with your situations as they happen. So as kind of a test for myself, I went ahead and made my reservations to go back to Reno for the 2012 races. And it took me a long time and a lot of hard thought before I was able to do it. But finally I just said, I'm not going to let this fear keep me from doing something that I know I enjoy. Finally, in September of 2012, I was able to go with my wife. We went to Reno, Nevada. Basically, that's what happened.